Adrienne, welcome to the show again. We're starting the new year. 2024 is here. The Workout M season 5 is here. And so are you. So welcome.
Thank you. I feel like I teleported here because that's how fast it feels, but glad to be back.
It really flew by. How's your start of the year? How's the start of 2024?
It's been really, really great. I took my own advice and really tried to take away some of the side things that I do and finished up some loose ends and really made use of that holiday vacation. So I am ready to go for 2024.
You're busting one of the myths right off the bat, and that is you are taking a vacation. As a matter of fact, you're not, keeping those hours accumulating and accumulating and accumulating, because I hear through the grapevine that a lot of folks in tech are always about, if you're not taking vacation, you're the one hustling. So it's like, all right.
So, one of the really cool things about Cisco is that there's a mandatory shutdown at the end of the year because it's kind of known, it's the holiday season. Most people take PTO time off anyway during that time. So, it's kind of like, hey, these last few weeks, which takes in, Christmas and New Year, we're pretty much asked to like you need to take off. We're going to put it into the PTO system anyway. So that I'm very, very thankful for. And they really encourage you to do that. So I really did it. I really took the time to just not think about work. I didn't even bring my laptop to where I did spend my holiday. It was great.
That is fantastic and highly encouraged, I think. Fantastic also that your company is supportive of that because I think vacations are necessary. Refreshing and not looking at a screen for some time, especially at the end of the year, is a good thing. And the fact that it's mandatory is also great to hear because I think if anybody deploys anything to production during the holidays, oof, that's just a recipe for a bad time.
It's just a bad time for everybody involved, for you, for those who are on call who have to answer that. Just don't do it. Please don't do it.
Just don't do it. Love it. And so in our previous episode, and for folks that do not know, we've talked to Adrienne before, and do check out the links in the show notes to go and get that other awesome episode. But we had more questions. That's why we're recording part 2. And one of the things that I want to talk more about is you are writing a book. Looks good to me. Constructive code reviews. So tell me more about how did that start? Like, what inspired you to write a book?
Oh, there's lots of things that inspire me. I think it comes from the experiences I've had over the last decade of being a software developer. A lot of it really is a lot of the processes you learn in software development. I think the very first ones that you learn, you kind of take that with you. You're like, if this is how it's done, this is the first way you learn it, you think that's how it should be done moving forward, unless someone teaches you otherwise, or you have a really good mentor in your next job that says, no, that's not the way it is. And so I think for me, the very first code review type process that I experienced was not a good one. It was it's a very mean. It was very much centered around can write code better than you. You're just this little junior who should listen to everything that I say. So taking that with me and moving through my career, I always thought, oh geez, this process is kind of just where you duke it out and you kind of have to show you're better than the other. And as I started to progress in my career and started to see different ways of doing it and talking to other developers, I realized it does not have to be that way. Like, that's not the point of a good code review process. So, taking all of those experiences, and then especially as I started my speaking career and talking to other developers, that's where I really realized that a lot of people had the same feelings about it. There are just so many parts about the code review process that's dreaded, even though it's such a key part of software development. So that's why I said, you know what? There's no like main book that talks about all of this, and I feel like I would be really, really happy to write about it. And so that was what started. That was a catalyst for this book.
Yeah, code reviews are one of those things that especially junior developers often struggle with because it's one of those areas where I think it's intimidating. I mean, you your whole life you've been writing code by yourself, your hobby projects, your GitHub repositories and whatnot, and now There's people paid to judge you.
Yes. It can very much feel that way. And yeah, that's, I think a lot of the junior developers and mid career developers have that same sentiment. It's like, oh, I hate this process because someone is just telling me that I am silly or I wrote bad code. And that's something I do touch on in the book, is that one of the things we do, no matter where you are in the career, really, is that you kind of tie your self worth to your code. And that's something we shouldn't do. So that's what makes it intimidating, is this is it's your baby, or it's almost like a self extension of who you are. So for someone to judge that, it almost feels like they're judging you or they're judging your ability. And if we take a different mindset about it and say, no, we're focusing on the code among other things, it's to just help you get better. It's to help the code base get better. But that's obviously something you need to learn and grow with. It's really hard to shake that part about it and get to that mindset of it's not me, it's the code that we're focusing on.
How should folks think about shaking that off? Because you're absolutely right. It's very common to think through code or any project as, this is my baby. I've been working on this. I had some ideas. I got inspired. I wrote this code. It works. It's elegant. And now these people are coming in and saying, actually, like, here's all these things that is wrong with it. And it's hard not to feel attacked, right? It's like, well, what do you mean? Like, I've been thinking about this very hard, and here's the code, and now you're telling me it's wrong? Why? How do you kind of shift that mindset from this is against me versus this is about the craft?
I think there's two parts to that. There's the author, the code, you who wrote the code, and then there's the reviewer. And both of those people in the code review have a responsibility to make the code review proper. So I've already mentioned, as the author, there is this part where you have to remove yourself from the code. You are not your code, and really have an open mind about the feedback that you receive, if you do receive feedback. Now, a larger part of this, and a big part of this having to be consistent, is the reviewer now also has to make sure, number one, that they write effective comments, and number two, that they do not use this process to point out everything that is wrong. There is a way to give constructive feedback that's not mean, that doesn't focus on the developer, that actually just focuses on the code. And so I think a lot of code authors, those who dread the code review, who feel like this is only to point out what's wrong with their code, have experienced a code review like that, where someone just pointed out, this is all terrible, this is crap. And one of the ways reviewers do that is they either don't tell you what is wrong. They either say, "Oh, this is terrible," and then don't tell you why. Or they say, "I think there's something wrong here," but don't expand on that. Or they just flat out say, be nitpicky. "Oh, there should be a space here. You're forgetting a comma here. There could be 300 comments just on formatting alone." But I think it's the responsibility of the reviewer to write constructive comments, to focus on the code, and to give constructive feedback in a way that doesn't attack the developer. I go into a lot of detail about that in my book.
Yeah. And so for folks that are listening to this, definitely get the book when the book comes out. But I do have the question, like, at a high level. So then, we talked about kind of the anti patterns of the review, but what is a constructive code review? Like, if somebody would think about, I want to do this right, what are the high level things they should be thinking about to make sure that it's perceived well and not as something that is just criticism for the sake of criticism?
We're going to need a part 3 if you're going to ask me that
All right,
question.
part 3 it is.
But I guess at a high level, so off the bat, it's going to depend on the team, right? If you have a team of full seniors who have worked with each other, who trust each other, who know their coding styles, who know their code base very well, you could argue that their code review is just a formality. It is something that is there to keep a record of, which is a goal that I think every team should have. And it's just there to say, okay, we've double checked it, and it passes through and merges on with the rest of the code base if you're using that system. If you have a mixed team, which is more likely for most people listening, then it could be different. First, you got to set up, what are the actual goals of the code review? Is it to have knowledge transfer? I think that should be the main goal for most teams. some people argue it's not to actually find bugs. You don't find bugs in a code review. That's arguable. You could argue about that. And then there are people who argue that there's a position to mentor during the code review as well. So first, it depends, what are you actually doing with your team? How do you want to use your code review? Now, let's say the goal that I think should be on everyone's team is knowledge transfer. If that's the case, there are lots of parts that need to be in play. If all the way from the beginning of planning your features and tasks, if you can plan with your team to make them as atomic and as small as possible, the resulting pull requests or, change requests that's going to happen should also be small. So at a high level, I think an effective code review is one that is small, that is manageable, that focuses on a single thing. And once it gets to that point where someone reviews the code, it is small enough to review by anybody. It is there to keep documentation of what's changing in the code base. And then it does provide a record for the whole team of, hey, this is now changing the state of our code base. This is why it is changing. That should be part of the pull request. And this is now a record for the whole team to be able to either go back on or move forward on or roll back. So at a high level, I think the code review, a good one should be one that's very small, one that describes why the change is going to be made, and keeps a very, it's an official record of what's changing in the code base, and that's communicated to the rest of the team.
I like the framing around the code review the way you just put it, because it focuses on team communication and being intentional about the fact that this is designed for other people. Like, you're not writing this for yourself. Like, think about all the other people that can be writing this and maintaining that down the line. Because in any big organization, it's usually probably you're not going to be the one that's going to be worrying about this code in 5 years.
Hopefully, ideally. But even if you are a selfish thinker, just take a look at your own projects and you go back to it 6 months, 1 year from now. Sometimes you don't remember you yourself what you have written. So if you keep that mindset and then think, oh, it's now for somebody else, you kind of shift your mindset to say, oh, not only should I write code that's clean, that's maintainable, but you also have this process that says, here are all the decisions, here are all the discussions we've had, the conversations, the related tickets. Why did we change it? That's the essence of what's happening here. And then for whatever reason, if you have to go back to it and reference it, and you have all of that information, which I think should be captured during the code review process, then it should be very, very helpful to you, because then you have all of that. You don't have just the code. Yes, I can see what's changed between the diff, but you have the reasons why.
That paper trail is so important, because in the moment, it often feels like, no, I'll remember this decision, whatever. That was easy. Yeah, this code changed this one API that we thought is going to be relevant. Yeah, it's like a week later, you're going to be looking at that same PR and be like, what was I thinking?
Exactly.
Why did we do this again? So
Mhm.
I think that the emphasis on having that very clear, crisp log of things that need to be happening and why they're happening and how the team actually reacted to them is paramount to writing any good code. But I want to talk more about writing the book, because I've never written a book yet. What's the process for getting started writing a book on a technical topic? Like, you have to start somewhere from zero, right? Like some kind of draft. Like, what's your process?
Yeah, I'll certainly share my experience. For me, somebody from Manning reached out to me and said, "We've seen what you've done in your talks and we've seen what you've written. We really like the way that you explain some technical topics. Is there a topic that you would consider writing for us?" Right? Sometimes you're really well known about a topic and they reach out to you. Other times, if you yourself have a topic, then you can send in a proposal, and you start that whole process. So assuming you get past that part and you're like, all right, now I have a deadline on my back, I need to write this book. My process is, I don't know if everybody will work the same way. I don't suggest it for everyone, but for me, it's a lot of research of just, I need to scour the internet and see what has already been written. What can I match to the experiences that I've had? what are the research papers that are out on these particular topics? And are there any things that have changed? Like, are there things from the 1970s that have already been written about this? And are people still talking about it today in some developers' blog posts? So I really scour as much as I can on the internet and sometimes in the library to see what's already there. And then I kind of take the themes of what I'm seeing and have that as high level topics. After I have those topics, I then kind of try to formulate a story or some sort of order of what the topics mean. So, for this particular book, of course, when I wrote a proposal, I already had those high level things of what I wanted to talk about. Those are the chapters, right? I said I definitely wanted to explain what is a code review, how do you write effective comments, is pair programming still relevant with code reviews? You have those higher level topics, and then you get as detailed as you want to be. Myself, I find anything that's somewhat related, something that I think if someone was reading my book and read this topic, what questions would they have about this particular chapter? And then I try to write about that. And so for me, again, I said I don't suggest this, but I'm I'm perfectionist in the way that when you write, I edit in real time. And it takes a long time because the common knowledge for writing is you spit out a draft that's terrible, that's not going to be your final draft, and then you iterate on it. And I can't do that. I don't know why I can't do it, but I start writing a chapter, and in the moment I just kind of go back to my notes. I say, oh, there's a story here or a blog post here or a statistic from a research paper that I think fits into the flow of what I'm trying to write. So I kind of write the entire chapter in its entirety as close to perfect as I can, or what I would be comfortable submitting. And then yeah, I actually just submit that. And then once I get feedback from my technical reviewer and my other editor, they make good points, right? Sometimes I'm so in the weeds of my own writing that they make good points of, oh, add a story here would make it more relevant. Or do you have a diagram or a visual to help explain this, or added an extra story here to really drive the point home. But yeah, that's kind of my process in a nutshell. And you just do that over and over and over for each chapter until you hopefully finish the book, which I'm hopefully going to finish the book by May of 2024. So
And so you have a code reviewer for the book about code reviews, which is your editor in a way, a
I
little bit
do.
meta.
I do. And the great part is that they are wonderful reviewers. They are considerate, they have constructive feedback. I never feel terrible about it. And it's exactly how code reviews should be. And so, yeah, I use that analogy a lot when people ask me what code reviews are. It's very similar to the editing process in writing.
For somebody that looks at this and thinks like, well, why should I write a book instead of, say, I don't know, writing on my blog post, on my newsletter, like button down, Substack, whatever you use? Like, why a book?
You don't have to write a book. That's the thing. If you're more comfortable with shorter form or even long form blog posts, and you have something to say, that's quite all right. If you start to notice that you are going back to a particular topic, or you have a series of things that you're writing about that you keep going back to, then that's something to consider to put into a book. I mean, for me, I'll be honest, writing a book is kind of a professional achievement that I consider. So that's what's driving me. And not only that, code reviews is something that I'm really passionate about. I have given talks on it. I talk to a lot of developers about it. Whenever someone asks me, what are, if you could focus on one thing for the rest of your developer relations career, it would be code reviews. It would be doing this process properly and more efficiently and more humanely. So I would argue that you don't have to write a book, you don't have to monetize it, but for me personally, it is a professional achievement. I would love to have a book that I wrote about something that I really care about. And if there is something like that you really, really care about, that you feel, nobody has really done it in the way that you would explain it, it's worth a shot. It's worth considering to maybe write that book.
Yeah, and especially because as you just mentioned, that just because a topic has already been covered doesn't mean that it's been covered well. It doesn't mean that it was covered for the audience that you're covering, which could be completely different, right? Like writing something, as you know, like writing something for a younger audience is different than writing for somebody that has a ton of experience and have been immersed in the field for like 3 decades.
I totally agree. I think that's something I've talked about a lot too with people who are considering writing. A lot of technical folks, they're like, "Oh, I think I'll just start out with writing a children's book." I'm like, "Do not kid yourself. That's not easier. It's not easier. Maybe if you do like a visual book, that would be cool. It's a lot harder to write an engaging piece to that audience. But hey, if that's something that you have experience with, or you like to draw, maybe you have illustrations as one of your other skills. I see a lot of people go that way, describing databases to babies, or talking about CICD in comic book form. Like there's so many different ways that you can write a book. It doesn't have to be a book like this one. And so again, it's in our last episode, we talked about combining those different skills that you have. I think that's one thing to consider. If you are able to combine those different skills into something unique, why not? It would be worth a shot.
And now I want to switch to a part of our show that's going to be new this season. And that is after our last episode, surprisingly, or not surprisingly, because it was a good episode, I got a few questions over email. And by the way, for folks listening to this, we are simplifying how you can ask questions. So you'll be able to go, by the time the show airs, to theworkitem.com/ask. And you can just ask your question. But in the meantime, it was sent to our email address. And I think a lot of these questions are relevant to your work. And I'd say, like, who better to ask than Adrienne herself once she comes back to the show? So the first question is related to remote work. And we've kind of, on the last episode, we kind of alluded to the fact that, there is kind of a balance between remote and hybrid. And the question is, more companies are forcing folks to come to the office. How should they think about defending the remote stance? And the word defend is kind of, I don't know. I don't know if it's the right word for this. Like, I don't know if you should be defending per se. Like, no, but what's your take? How should they defend their remote stance?
Thinking about it, and it might be a hot take, but thinking about it, the real reason why everyone's being forced back to work is there's so much real estate that's just sitting there and spoiling. So that's kind of the reality of it. But I think in order to defend or really show why remote work is proper, let's say that there is someone who has a family who has really enjoyed the flexibility of being at remote work. You could argue that the more time that you would have to take off from work to do those engagements now, picking them up from school, bringing them to sports events, things like that, you could argue that, even if you're forcing them to go to work, they're still not going to be fully there. They're still going to be taking this time off to go support their family and do the things they were already able to do. And that could further be argued that they're not as productive, or they're not putting in as many hours into their work. You could even, if you really want to prove a point, show that less work is being accomplished while being in the office rather than being at home. Another story that I've read or have actually spoken to directly was all these people are being forced back into the office, but this return to office uh, uh, you know, situation has not been planned out very well by even some of the top companies. So I hear stories of you're being forced to go back into the office, but you're fighting for a desk. You don't have a place to work. You have people who get random exceptions, or you have meetings that you are taking virtually anyway. So these are all points that I would say logically, from our point of view, it doesn't make sense to force people to return to work. But at the end of the day, is that something that really moves the needle? Can you actually argue to the top that this is enough to force them to really come back into the office? So I think the most realistic case that you can argue is maybe not a full return to office, but maybe a hybrid situation where you still are able to plan that flexibility into your case, and then you still get that time in person with people. But yeah, I mean, take everything I say with a grain of salt. I'm, again, fully remote. That's the perspective that I'm coming up with at this point, that now that you've asked me.
It absolutely is also employer dependent, right? Like to what extent are you really gonna say like, yeah, your HR department decided you're going back to office? Like how much leverage do you really have? Like, I mean, yeah, you can contact the benefits team, you can contact your manager, but to that extent, it's like if that's the company policy, that's the company policy. That's kind of it.
Right. I mean, now that you've spoken about that, there are some other situations where, people have relocated as a remote family, even taking their entire family, and now they're being asked to go back into the office that's in a completely different state with very little relocation assistance. So this is not to say, be grateful for what you have, but it's just the reality of what's happening. And unfortunately, before, I would say, well, if this employer doesn't work for you, quit and find another one. That's a very privileged thing to say. And before, the job market was actually that great. It was that flexible. You could find somewhere else that is remote, but unfortunately, it's not that easy now. You can't just, quit on Friday and find a job on Monday, which used to be the case. So if that's possible for you, I would say that's something to consider, is if it really is not working out and you are able to find a place that is still remote friendly, like Cisco is still super remote friendly, then try to find a job that in a place where it's always been remote friendly, it's been remote, or they know about the importance of remote first and not caring about where you work.
Yeah, and that's actually a great call out. Like there's companies right now that are still very supportive of the remote work or at least hybrid work. I think not 100% at the office. And Cisco was one of them. Like I work for Microsoft, and like we're the same way. Like I barely go to the office because my entire team is distributed. They're all over the world. So like these companies and teams, they do exist, and this is something that is important to you because of your family situation, because of your life circumstances. I think it's worth exploring those options for sure. That makes a lot of sense. Let's jump to the next question. So the next question is about mentorship. And it is, I really want to find a mentor, but nobody is responding to my LinkedIn messages despite personalizing them. What should I do?
For someone who is looking for a mentor, I would say try different areas if you can. And what I mean by that is, if you have the opportunity to go to a meetup, a local meetup, or you have areas that hold like tech get-togethers, that's a start. You can go there. You can try to see who are the organizers there, and maybe talk about your situation, because in person, to me, I think is always the best case to find. It's the easiest. You can actually meet in person. Just talking about remote work, that's funny. But if you're able to find someone close to you, local, I think that's very, very helpful. If that's not an option for you, I would say try to find like what, I would want to know, how are you personalizing the mentorship message? Because it's one thing to blast out to potential people who you'd love to be your mentor, to say, you just change the name and you're like, I'm looking for a mentor, right? Yes, that's personalizing it, but that's not really something that's really putting an effort. Now, assuming you are really putting an effort into those messages, you've taken the time to look at what that person does, you are finding ways of, I think the essence of what I'm trying to say is, understanding that a lot of potential mentors are likely busy. Have you done the work to say, what do you want out of the mentorship? What is it that you're asking for? If I were to receive a message that said, hey, I am looking, I love what you do, I'm looking to get into developer relations, I would love just a weekly 30-minute call with you to talk about what developer relations is like, what do I need to get started in the industry, and I'm looking to do this for about a month. I think that message would be more well received than something that's just as broad, that says, I really like what you do, I'm looking to get into the industry, would you be my mentor? Because I have received messages like that. So I would say the more specific that you can be while also being considerate of that person's time, I think will get you a better reception by the person that you are asking. What is it that you're getting wanting out of the mentorship? Is it review? Is it something longer term? Figure out those pieces and then craft that message. Then those cold, emails or LinkedIn messages will probably have a better shot.
As you were talking about this, I had more questions about this question than answers per se. But the thing that kind of stood out to me is like it probably also depends on who you're asking and the way you're asking. Because you're absolutely right. Like to me, if somebody reaches out and says, "Hey, can you be my mentor?" Bells keep going off. That's like, oh my gosh, that's another time commitment. I don't know this person. I'm busy as is. There's like so many things that I need to be doing. And like now I need to be talking to this random person about like whatever they need. Like that's very like this kind of fuzzy problem that I don't know if I even want to deal with. But if you become more specific about a specific area and say, I need this for the next like 2-3 weeks, a month, like there's a concrete time frame and you're asking for specific times, that can be a little bit probably more well received. And the other thing too is, depending on who you ask, like if you're reaching out to like VPs and CEOs to be like, all right, like maybe not, but like, have you considered reaching out to folks like on their teams that are not like directly like the highest paid person? Again, we don't have a lot of context for this question, but these are probably things to consider.
Absolutely. And, I know listening to this, it's probably like, oh, you're too important or busy to deal with the next generation. It's absolutely not that. If I could clone myself and provide a mentor for everyone, I would. But the reality of the situation is, I still have a full time job. I still have other side things I'm doing. I still have family. I'm a person just like you. So if you really take that into consideration, and then figure out what's realistic and what could you ask of someone. You maybe you're thinking, oh, I need like a 6-month mentorship where they're really there driving it home for me. Maybe that's not what you need. Maybe you just need a very quick 20-minute call with someone to figure out what is DevRel actually like, and then you figure out that's actually not what you want to do. That could be just as impactful for you than assuming that you need like a full-time mentor to be there for you. You could find that somewhere else. And the other thing is, there are people who actually open up mentorships and they publicly broadcast this. So I've seen this on Twitter, I've seen this on LinkedIn. There are folks who are amazing who are like, look, I have some free time. I have space for 2 or 3 mentees who want to learn about, being a software developer or getting into game development or whatever the topic is. Look for those announcements, search for those on LinkedIn and Twitter and, Dev, all the places, because sometimes that's even better, right? Because now they are open. They're letting you know they have the time and space and are actually seeking out mentees. So that's another option if the personalized messages don't go in your favor.
And from what you just mentioned, maybe the hack to cracking this is not actually asking for mentorship, but asking for specific advice.
Yes, I agree. I think most people think that they want the mentor, the whole mentor, everything about what you think a mentor is, but it is likely just specific advice or just a quick look over. Most of the ones that I have answered, it's usually like that. It's, can you take a look at my resume to see if this would actually fit as a junior developer? Or can you tell me more about what you actually do in a day to day? Because I want to know. I've seen DevRel positions post, everywhere, but I don't know if it's actually what it is. Can you let me know more about that? Those are more specific things that myself, I can say, okay, that's a very quick 30-minute call that I can do. It's no problem for me to schedule that in, find time in my schedule. So 100% agree. Be more specific about the advice that you want to seek from someone.
Our next question is coming from a person that apparently already has a mentor. And the question is, what should be my check in cadence with my mentor? We had a few chats, but I'm unsure about whether to bug them about my work more.
The cadence will depend on the mentor and mentee. So that's probably reality number one. What's the schedule like for both of you? Number two, what are the goals again that you're trying to get out of the check-ins? Is it, do you have a major project that you are working through and you want to check in and say, what should I be doing next? Or how do you, what goals should I be setting for myself with this project? Maybe you check in once every month for that. If you have something that's a bit longer term, let's say you've just started on a new team, it's too early to tell what to do, and you're just getting, used to the whole situation in a company, there may not be much to talk about with your mentor. Maybe you check in every 6 months, every 3 months. It really depends. But I think what should drive that is there some key turning point or some key question goal, again, that you just want a little bit more advice about that you can take with you moving forward? That should be the driver. And you don't even need to have like a calendar series of these check-ins. Some people, it's like it's a check box that they check, and you don't really talk about anything. It's similar to people who have one-on-ones with their manager, right? You don't really have much to say. If you have something to say, make that be the driver. Have it be nothing on the calendar, and then when you do have something important, that's when you work with your mentor to schedule something in the upcoming few weeks and then talk about it. I think that's a much better, more effective use of both of your time, and you don't feel that way in your check-in, or you don't feel that way in your check-in where you are grasping to find something to talk about.
Like, it's not a forced thing that you absolutely have to meet like every week, like a, kind of play it by ear depending on your circumstances. But also, I think if I'm reading between the lines, like probably the fear here is like out of sight, out of mind. Or like, oh, if my mentor doesn't talk to me for a long time, they're going to forget about me, and then it's going to be that much harder to reach out to them again.
That is valid. I think, again, there's some responsibility on both sides from the mentor and the mentee. So if you have gotten into this type of mentorship where they've agreed to be talking with you over the course of, let's say, a year or like 6 months, something longer than just a single chat, then I think there is some responsibility to have some cadence from the mentor side. Like if the mentor spoke to you once, you've agreed to have this mentorship type of thing, and then the mentor just kind of is gone, that's on the mentor. That's not on you. So I think for the mentee, if you have something, if you have a goal, that would be a starting point to schedule a chat. For the mentor, it is somewhat on you to say, okay, I've made this promise, I've had this obligation now to someone who is expecting me to talk with them and guide them and go through this. Now that's on you to at least check in, like I would argue once a month. And it doesn't even have to be a whole video call. It's at least sending an email or a message that says, hey, how have you been? Anything you want to talk about? And you drive that conversation if the other person feels like they need that extra boost from you.
I'd say like there's two more questions. They're both interesting, and I'll save the best for last.
Oh
I'll
gosh,
start with
okay.
this one. Is I want to start speaking in public. Conferences, events, meetups, doesn't really matter as long as I get exposure to the tech scene. I'm anxious that folks around me know way more than I do on the subject matter, and I don't have much to add. Where do I start?
When I first started speaking, the very first conference I had was Nebraska JS conference. And this was at a time where the talk that got accepted was delicious JavaScript methods, JavaScript array methods with dessert examples. So I'm like, first of all, how did this get accepted? Because when you looked at all the other talks that were part of this conference, it was like deep dive into WebAssembly and what is the state of JavaScript, and let's look at the state of a case study of how JavaScript really changed our company. And here's me like, oh, I'm going to talk about array methods, but I got accepted. So that's number one. Number two, even though you feel like things have been talked about before, or you feel like people know so much more about that, there have never been talks that have been given the way you would give them. So that's exactly what happened with me. I talked about JavaScript array methods and used dessert examples. I talked about map, filter, array. I had marshmallow emojis in there. I had cookie emojis in there. And, at the time, I did feel that way. I'm like, why would people listen to me? They know this already. And this is so silly. Like, everyone's going to think I'm just here just to be here to fulfill some sort of, random quota. And at the end of that talk, there were a lot of people who came up to me and said, you know what? After you have explained it with the way that you explained it, I actually now get reduce. I get map reduce because of the way that you explained it. Or I now get filter because you made it seem so easy. And that was like a light bulb moment for me. Not only did it feel good, but I'm like, okay, this is something I thought everybody knew. This is a JavaScript conference. But there are people out there who might like the way you explain something. Maybe you use more visuals. Maybe they have the same background as you. Maybe the way that you explain it resonates with them. When people look to find learning material, I think everyone's experienced this. You start looking at somebody's blog post or a tutorial, you start seeing, and it just doesn't gel with you. So you go find another tutorial. This one is too long, so you go find another one. This one doesn't have code samples, so you go find another one. You keep filtering and going until you find something that resonates with you, something that matches the way that you would want to learn something. And so that's the same thing with public speaking is there are always going to be talks that talk about the same thing, but it's never going to be explained in the way that you would explain it. So keeping that in mind, go to your meetups, especially the local meetups, if you want to get your feet wet and start. They're always looking for people to talk about things, and that's a really good playground to kind of get your feet wet and start speaking in public, even if it's just a small audience. And then second, always ask for assistance. So if you do go to a bigger conference, like I just went full on, let's just go to a big conference. Most organizers are so helpful and so willing to help you go practice your talk. They'll help you rewrite something. They'll help you with your slides. A lot of them offer that extra assistance. They even offer you to practice on your stage the day before, so you get comfortable with everything. So a lot of the conferences and local meetups, they're very, very, very open to new speakers and will help them be successful. So go do it.
Go do it. It's just like the
Just do it.
Nike slogan. Just do it. Yeah.
Just do it.
Fantastic advice. Now, the last question. This is going to be a hot take here. I can already feel it.
Oh,
so it talks about developer advocacy. And the question is, for some time now, I've been considering switching from software engineering to developer advocacy, but I am unsure what the future career prospects are. My peers are discouraging me because they think I can grow my career faster as a software engineer. Are they right?
Again, what is your goal here? What do you want to grow your career because you want to make more money? Do you want to did developer advocacy initially pique your interest because it's combining things that you like to do? Are you bored with just coding and doing, building features and being on a software development team? What about developer advocacy initially drew you to it? Because if you just saw a job post that says, oh, developer advocacy, you can make more, and you want to switch over to that, you're going to have a bad time. Like there's a whole other set of skills that you need for developer advocacy. Another caveat, some people are like, oh, developer advocacy, it's a dream job. You just go travel everywhere and you just write blog posts and you create content on stuff that you already know. And let's say you're already a content creator on the side of being a software developer. And you're like, well, let me just make it a job, because why not? Well, like I said in the first episode, if it's something that you love, don't monetize it or don't actually make it into a job, because then it's going to be a bad time and you start to not like it anymore. The whole reason why you got into it in the first place on the side, on your own free time, is because you enjoyed it. Now you have metrics to hit. Now you have blog post quotas to hit. Now you have to travel way more often than you want to. And it's not just the conferences that you want to go to. It's, oh, we have a company conference here, here, and here, and you're expected to go there, and you need to help out with being at the booth, and you need to do all of these other, I would argue, mundane parts of developer advocacy that are part of the job. So it's a very open ended question, right? Growing your career is very vague. Growing your career, what does that mean to you? Is it going all the way up to becoming a principal software engineer at your company and having that prestige, being able to lead a team, having more responsibilities or working on projects at a higher level, being an architect for that, focusing more on the bigger picture, the system design, rather than just coding out the features? What is it that you want to do? What do you feel like is the growth of your career? And figuring that out first, I think, will help you decide, oh, I actually kind of want to stay in software development. Or if you're like, no, I actually do want to try out using my skills in software development, but applying it to public speaking. Or I think I could create really, really good documentation and initial tutorials and demo apps because the ones I've seen are terrible. So I know I could do a better job. Like, those should be the guiding questions for yourself to point you in either direction. And then the last thing I'll say with the job prospects, developer advocacy is fairly new, and just looking at the job market, typically the tech layoffs I've seen have affected developer advocacy. So take with that what you will. Maybe in the future it's going to start growing again, and we'll see more people needing that. But uh, I think it's just something to consider. I think with software development, personally, software development is a much safer bet to stay within software development. But yeah, if you're wanting to try it out, developer advocacy, not just for the money, not just for the potential, glamorous lifestyle of traveling around, then yeah, why not take a shot? And if your company actually would be willing to let you try that, why not try whatever it is about developer advocacy that you want to try? Like, go give a talk while you're still a software engineer. I would argue that a lot of people would be like, oh, here's an actual developer, not just someone there's kind of this negative connotation, a little bit, of developer advocates, that they're just marketing people, that they're not actually developers. And that's false. There are a few developer advocates like myself who did come from development. But, if you are a software developer, that's your title, and you're giving a talk, you have a little bit more authority. People kind of believe you more because you are not a developer advocate. So keep that in mind, whatever that means.
I think you're alluding to something that is probably also a fault of the industry. It's in the sense that the role is new, so a lot of organizations don't quite know how to properly structure it. Like, they have heard about this new cool thing called developer advocates. Like, let's hire a bunch of developer advocates, right? And then it all goes and reports to marketing, or all goes and reports to the CIO. That is like
Yep.
completely like misplaced. Where you're like, what is like? This is not just marketing, right? Like, developer advocacy is not just somebody going and giving talks. We're talking about somebody that is an actual expert in the product, be it the SDK, the language, the tooling, whatever. And because of this organizational structure that creates these biases, like, oh, they're just marketing, like whatever. But they're not just marketing.
Right, right. I think that does play into it because, there are a lot of developer advocacy teams that are strictly marketing. Prior to Cisco, when I was interviewing for my next job, some of the companies I interviewed at, I would always ask, where does this report to and what is my main responsibility? And it's very telling when some of them are like, oh, this is reporting directly to the VP of marketing. And typically, I'm not going to say all, typically when they do that, you are now trying to hit marketing metrics. How many conversions did you do? How much content are you pushing? And for those types of developer advocacy teams, I think a lot of developers who go into developer advocacy get very disappointed because it's not what they thought it was. The original definition of developer advocacy that I've heard, which initially drew me in, was you are the connection between the company and the developers. You use your developer expertise to listen to feedback, to understand the pain points and needs of developers, and then you bring that back to the product team, or to make the product better, to make it better with the needs of the developers in mind. And that is actually implemented in various ways and in different capacities at different teams. And then all this other stuff is just ancillary: giving talks, writing blog posts, creating demo apps. Depends on the company how much of that they do and how important that is. For one company, it's like, you need to get this many views on this blog post. For another company, they could care less if you write a blog post, as long as you're actually connecting with the developer community and making the product better. So just like software development jobs, it really depends on the company and the team.
Yeah, and especially for developer advocacy, things like, hey, you have to make sure that your YouTube video has 10,000 views in the first week. And like, really? Because
Yeah,
that's what you're optimizing for as a
right.
developer advocate. Like, all right, sure.
Like I said, don't make it a job, because it'll suck all the fun out of it. Before, you could just, post a video and you're like, cool, if anyone likes it, great. And if not, great. Now you're like, if I don't get 10,000 views, oh gosh, that's on your performance review. And it's like, why would you want to deal with that? Yeah.
That's been a great mailbag episode. We answered all the questions, and there's some really good answers and really good questions. So thank you, folks, for submitting them. And don't forget the workitem.com/ask if you have more. Adrienne, thank you so much for being with us today. So your book looks good to me. Constructive Code Reviews coming out later this year. And then folks can find you on your website, if I'm not wrong.
Yep. Website and Twitter, though it's been kind of dormant there for everybody, I think. But yeah, website, Twitter, and LinkedIn if you want to find me. And if you have more questions, please feel free.
And I like that you're still referring to the Twitter. I cannot bring myself to call it X. It just does not roll off the tongue the same way.
Nope. It will always be Twitter. I'm
It's
sorry.
Twitter. It's the bird.
Yes.
Adrienne, thank you so much for being on the episode today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and I can't wait. Hopefully, we'll see each other or talk to each other again soon.